Okay, so my name is Johanna Sievewright. I work with American Transmission Company, or ATC. You can go to the next slide, Dan. And as Dan was mentioning, he asked me to just put some slides together and talk for 15 minutes or so here on where ATC is in our CCAA implementation planning process, to just get people thinking about how this agreement can be implemented and carried out as we get towards close to the hopeful completion and signing of the CCAA. So a little bit of background and context on ATC so that you all understand our business and what we do out on the landscape as I move forward in this. We are an electric utility, and we are transmission only. We have no distribution lines or generation facilities. So that's important to know as we start to talk about our adoption rates. And we have approximately 10,000 miles of lines and about 568 substations, and have facilities in Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan, and Illinois. So that's a little background there on ATC. You can go to the next slide, Dan. So given the fact that we are transmission only, our CCAA adoption rate would be that 18%. So what I started doing, quite some time ago is just starting to gather up all of our acreages out there for our enrolled acres. So this is a little screenshot of a spreadsheet that I've put together to just really start help me tracking our enrolled acres and how I got to this number. So I thought I'd walk through this a little bit to have you all kind of understand how we've done this. So we have different categories. Our rights of way, where I said we have approximately 10,000 acres, or 10,000 miles. I then transferred that to total acres of right-of-way up here in this first row of this table. And that's all of our right-of-way that we have. I utilized our overhead and underground lines, and I ended up using actual right-of-way widths. We have different varying widths of our right-of-way based on the voltage of our lines. And I had started with just thinking I would use an average of about 100 feet and apply that over all of my mileage. But I actually was able to work with our GIS department and find out that they do actually have by line the right-of-way widths. And when I was making the assumption of about 100 feet width for an average, I was up at about 120,000 acres. But when I actually applied the actual right-of-way width instead of using the estimate, that acreage came down to 101,000 acres. So for me, that was, worth going through that exercise. Essentially, we have more low voltage lines in that mileage than we do the high voltage lines. So that's how that's explained. Then the next row in this table is temporary off right-of-way access. So this is the areas we use that are off right-of-way that we need to consider in our enrolled acres and hold some acreage there on an annual basis for those areas. Just based on past capital projects that we have, we went and looked back over the last 5 years and used some of that data. We assumed 5% of our right-of-way acreage would be conservative. And then we also, considered the fact that our off right-of-way access areas are generally only about 20 feet in width versus the full width of our right-of-way. So that's a little background on how we came up with that number. And then we also have this next row here, total acres of the SS, that's our substation sites. And so we do have substation facilities that are different from our right-of-ways, our transmission lines, and was able to, again, work with our GIS department to calculate the total acres of those substation sites and came up with my total enrolled acres of the 110,390. And then when I apply the 18% adoption rate for transmission, you can see there that ATC's annual conservation measure acreage goal is 19,870. So as we move on then, now I know what my goal is to try to meet with the conservation measures. You know, took a look and evaluated the conservation measures that are part of the agreement. And I have circled here the ones that ATC implements already as part of our standard business operations. And so these are the ones that I'm focusing on tracking and getting that acreage for. So essentially seeding and planting to restore or create habitat, herbicide treatments, brush removal to promote suitable habitat, and then the suitable habitat set-asides. You can go to the next slide. And if anyone has questions as we go through here, please just stop me before I get too far ahead of myself. So then we started thinking about this implementation tracking. As I said, these are already activities that we're doing, but how do we find a way to track these so that we can report on what we need to for the CCAA, have it all, the tracking sort of all in one nice, easy place, and then, again, roll that tracking into our monitoring requirements and have a way to easily build a monitoring program where we know where these activities, conservation measures have been implemented, and we can go find those locations in the field to monitor them. So the first measure I'll cover for our implementation tracking is seeding and planting to restore or create habitat. This is going to be the conservation measure where we're going to get the least amount of acreage, just based on, not saying we aren't doing a lot of it, but based on a comparison between the other measures that we'll implement, this will be the least amount of our acreage. We have been using for the last year or two an ArcGIS online system to track all of our pollinator seeding areas. I presented on this at one of the Rights-of-Way Habitat Working Group meetings. So this one for me here at ATC is going to be very easy to just ask my GIS department at the end of the year to pull the acreage, and I'll know, also be able to have that spatially on a map where it happened and the total acreage. So that system is already set up for me, and I feel very comfortable knowing where that is happening and pulling those acreages. You can go on to the next one, Dan. So the next one that I'm going to talk about for the conservation measures is our suitable habitat set-asides. And I kind of knew right away when we started planning this that this is where ATC would be likely getting the majority of our adopted acreages through the conservation measures. And essentially the suitable habitat set-asides is the acreage in our system within what we're calling suitable habitat for the monarch that is not impacted in a given year. So what I've done for past years and will do, for future years as we enroll in the CCAA is identify areas where vegetation management and capital projects occur on our system on an annual basis. I know working with my vegetation management department and my construction department that these are schedules I can get at the beginning of the year for where we plan to conduct the work, just based on, how we manage these departments already. Again, this isn't anything new. It's just getting my hands on it as the, person responsible for the tracking and of the CCAA requirements. I just need to get my hands on those schedules. And then here at ATC, gosh, a while ago now, maybe 4 years ago or so now, maybe 3 or 4 years, we developed something that we call our POWER model, which is called Pollinator Opportunities Within Rights-of-Way. We've presented on this at the Rights-of-Way Habitat Group meetings as well, but essentially it's a model we developed based on pretty detailed land use coverage types in our service territory that identifies areas for us to focus our pollinator efforts on for enhancement areas across our landscape. And we also identified, based on land cover type, areas of already existing suitable habitat. So I feel comfortable that I have a good estimate on where on our system we have existing suitable habitat. So then I can overlay that suitable habitat on the areas of our system that are not going to be impacted in a given year based on my vegetation management and capital project schedules. So as you can see, I was pretty sure this is where we would get the majority of our committed acreage. And you can see then in this second bullet point on this slide that, we have the total estimated right-of-way acres of 101,000, and then I'm assuming approximately 30% of all that acreage is in suitable habitat, and again, that's based on my power model. And then I know that I will conduct approximately 20,000 acres of vegetation management annually based on our cycle of our veg management activities and when we implement those. And then I looked at 5 years of past capital project data to come up with an average of 2,500 acres impacted by capital projects annually. So these are just numbers I used to estimate to get an idea of how many total annual set-aside acres I would have, but in each year I would get the actual schedules to get those acreages instead of using the averages. But that would put me at approximately 23,631 acres of total set-asides annually. And as you notice from the first slide, our goal is 19,000. So just this conservation measure gets us above our goal. However, we do need to implement and track more than just one conservation measure per this CCAA. But this is just to show that, this is the conservation measure where we plan to get most of our acreage. So does anyone have questions on that? Okay, you can go to the next slide then, Dan. So the next conservation measure we plan to track is brush removal to promote suitable habitat. And with ATC's vegetation management program and implementing integrated vegetation management on our system, this is a conservation measure that we are assuming that any of our mowing activities that we conduct through our vegetation management department would be counted towards this goal, because in our specification for mowing, we don't mow unless we have greater than 30% density of incompatible woody vegetation. So we are considering that to be brush removal to promote suitable habitat. So tracking for this activity, we really need to know approximate acreage of these mowing activities and then where it happened on the landscape so that we can go back and do appropriate monitoring. And right now, ATC does not currently track these activities in GIS. So this is something I'm working with the company now that we've, decided we're committed to joining the CCAA and, getting a tracking system set up to meet our application timeframe. We plan to apply maybe by the end of the year, if not, hopefully by March of next year. So we need to have tracking ready to go for our activities starting in January. So I'm currently working with our vegetation management and GIS departments to build a tracking system, hopefully utilizing the ArcGIS online system that ATC uses quite globally throughout our company. Really just hopefully putting the requirement on the vegetation management contractor to track either by span or by parcel, where they're mowing, and saying yes or no, like in a drop-down box to mowing, and then a % of that span or parcel mowed. And I will probably just have them have 4 options of, 25%, 50, 75, or 100%, so that I can build some shape files based on that information tracked in ArcGIS online system. This is something that our contractors already do. They already enter that level of data. It's just in another software system that doesn't speak very well to GIS. So I'm just trying to work to kind of transfer where they're tracking some of the data. And so again, it's important to have several other departments through the company on board with this approach, as it's a multifunctional area change. So this is something we've been thinking about and talking about for about a year now to get set up for this. However, I'm still not confident that we will have the tracking for the mowing properly in place and that system built come January. So I'm kind of thinking about this ramp-up period option that we have within the CCAA and want to talk more at my pre-application meeting with Dan and Iris about that to see if we may need to utilize that option just based on the status of the tracking system, not really the implementation of the conservation measure, but to properly track it in the requirements of the CCAA. So next slide, Dan. So another conservation measure we'll be employing is the targeted herbicide treatment. And again, with our herbicide treatments, we are assuming all of our herbicide treatments are targeted except for cut stubble treatments, and we really don't do a lot of cut stubble on our system. We don't do any, aerial spraying, anything like that. Ours are all, our herbicide is all employed mainly with ATVs or backpacks, and we're really just treating those incompatible populations and species. And so the same thing with mowing, essentially, for this herbicide treatment is we don't have a system set up in our GIS yet for this tracking. We're currently working with the VM and GIS departments to hopefully build something as we work on the mowing tracking as well. And again, we may need to utilize this ramp-up period depending on if we can get something built in the next couple of months here. And that's really largely based on the level of effort will be and the availability of our GIS department to respond to that need. Next slide. So as we, I'm trying to kind of think about this CCAA and implementation of it in bite-sized pieces, and kind of once I got my arms around implementation and where our numbers will be and how we can get some systems built, now my mind is kind of going to monitoring, thinking, come 2020 is if we sign up, we'll have to start our monitoring, and how are we going to be ready for that? Given our acreages, our acreage goals, 50 sites is our target, our requirement for monitoring based on our estimates. We're considering this reporting or monitoring every other year just based on our internal resources. We get interns within our environmental department every other year. They go out and do a lot of field work for us, and so I'm just trying to be strategic about how we will wrap this all together. But then obviously we will determine our monitoring sites based on our ratio of conservation measure implementation. So looking at our acreages, obviously most of my monitoring will be conducted on those suitable habitat set-asides, because that's where we'd be getting most of our acreage, and then we would, split that up. I also know our system, most of my acreages is coming out from our vegetation management activities. Across our territory, we have 5 transmission vegetation management specialists. So if I have to monitor 50 sites, if I split that out over each of my transmission vegetation management specialist areas and really have them work closely with me to help us pick, some sites for monitoring that are easy to get to, that really do reflect the conservation measures that were being implemented. I feel like that, makes that 50 quite reasonable to be able to get done. So that's where we are as ATC right now, moving towards implementation of this in 2020. So are there questions that anyone has?
Hey, Johanna, this is Brian Bob. Great presentation. Couple of points of clarification. The temporary off right-of-way access, is that for your long-term maintenance? So anything that you're accessing off right-of-way to perform long-term maintenance, or is that associated with capital projects? It wasn't clear.
That would be both, but just given in a 1 year, kind of our, because we're not using these unless there's work being done on the line in that given year. So that's kind of an annual number. That's an estimate, but that would cover both.
Okay, and then the 2,500 acres of annual capital projects, are that's new acreage that's coming onto the system on an annual basis?
No, that's just our existing enrolled acres. We go out and do rebuilds or OPGW replacement or, are out there impacting those existing right-of-ways. So we took a look at 5 years of past capital project data and looked at mileage of our, projects that we've done over that many years and came up with that average. So again, when we actually do our reporting, those would be actuals that I would work with our construction department to get. But I looked at those past averages just to get an idea of where I was at from an acreage standpoint in that regard. And we pulled those numbers when we were calculating our impacts to the species when we were first gearing up for the CCAA and trying to get an idea of our impacts out there on a given year. So.
Okay, so it's capital work, but it's essentially rebuild work or within existing rights of way.
Yes, it's not ones where we would build new lines and have to add those to our enrolled acres at an annual basis.
Understood. Thanks for the clarification.
Mm-hmm.
I think you piqued interest on having interns help with habitat monitoring. So,
okay.
Wendy, you chatted a question. If anybody else is hiring interns to help with habitat monitoring, if you're just interested in that broadly, and then also if there's, I think for you, Johanna, or also anybody else on the call, if there's an intern job posting that you can share just to give them something to start with, I think they'd appreciate that. So again, that was Wendy Green.
Okay. Yeah, I know, here at ATC in our environmental department, we have had interns for, the past 10 years. Again, we get 2 every other year instead of 1 every year because we have them do a lot of field work and we like to have the buddy system. Essentially, we started hiring them really to help cover our Monarch Butterfly monitoring requirements, which we have a habitat conservation plan for. So another species that, and a plan that we have monitoring requirements for. And so our posting would be very broad. We have them do a lot more activities than just the monitoring, but I could try to find a posting and share that. But again, ours wouldn't be just specific to, Monarch CCAA monitoring.
Great. Katasha had a question. She asked if any of the transmission lines that you have coincide with DOT rights-of-ways, and if so, how are those being addressed in your enrolled lands coverage?
Well, there's that part in the application, Dan, right, where we say, do they overlap with, or is it in the annual report, or is it in the application where we say, do we overlap with other partners? Help me remember that. But essentially, we do have in our system, where we would overlap with DOT in our GIS system and would be marking that where it's asked in, again, I can't remember if it's the application or the annual report.
Yeah. Well, we ask, I think, in the application if you know of other CCA partners that would potentially overlap, and then in the tracking, if you know that a particular location or measure was overlapping with another, you can note that.
Yeah.
But I think to maybe help answer that question, you're including all those lands as part of your enrolled acreage, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Heather Meyer also mentioned that, yeah, she'd be interested in the language that's shared for job postings for interns as well.
Okay. Carolyn or someone, can you maybe jot down who's interested, and then I can maybe send it through you in case we want to have that for someone else. Okay. I just don't know that I have. Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
I can maybe send that on to Carolyn.
If anyone else is interested, then yeah, just let me know and I can send it so I'm not spamming everyone's inbox.
Great. Any other questions? No? All right, well, thank you so much, Joanna. I think this is really, really helpful. I think it always helps to see how other people are approaching this and thinking about it and working through some of those questions. So hopefully this is helpful to everybody else here.